Hey everybody, it is time for another Native American flute lesson, which I love. I think it's awesome when the first and third Wednesdays roll around because it's just fun to do these lessons. It's fun to get out there. It's fun to showcase new techniques, new tricks, and new things that you can do to learn how to play this flute a little bit better and some skills you might be able to pick up. And, it's getting you out there and playing, getting you out there and performing, getting you out there and being better musicians and better flute players, which is awesome. This is an exciting time because I think we're actually moving on to, oh man, if I remember correctly, we're like on our 11th, which means one more and we are at the 6 month time frame of how many lessons that we have been going on for how many months, which is fantastic. 6 months is always a good time. You know how the world kind of gets measured in her world of like half a year, three, quarter of a year and everything like that. It's a good time to maybe look back at what we've done, look back at what we've learned, and assess of where we are and where are we going, right? Wow, look at what we've accomplished in the first 6 months versus wow, where are we going to be in the next 6 months. So it's a really cool time. I love this idea and I love this excitement that's in there. We are in February of 2021, which is the month of love, which means go out there and if you haven't fallen in love or you haven't tried to get out there and be in love, go out and try. It's all about you getting out into the world and expressing with other people, sharing what you know with other people, and really there is no better way to express yourself than through the world of music. Music touches people in such a different way than words do. It allows you to maybe convey a couple different thoughts that you weren't able to convey through speech or through hand gestures or through the written word or whatever it is. Music somehow just kind of allows you to capture different essences and different ideas, and so allowing you to grow as a musician, as a performer, and to enhance your skill sets allows you to put more expression out there, and that expression is really kind of special. And especially during this time of love, it's also one of those things that can make you more appealing to the people that you are looking to be more appealing to, whoever that may be. So let's get into it. Let's actually start using the Native American wood flute as a cool little instrument of expression. It's also known in some of the tribes as the courting flute, and it's also known as the love flute as other in other areas and things like that. So it's kind of nice to know that this little guy here has some sort of special heightened ideas in terms of the world of February. Kind of cool. So as always, we will go back at least a little bit to recap what we've done, allow you to catch up, or allow you to remember and recall what we've kind of been learning and talking about. And if this is your first time here and your first visit here, also allow you to see where we have come from, which is also really good. If we look back 2 lessons, so we look back at our lesson 9, we were talking about attacks and releases. More importantly, we're talking about adding some attacks and adding some releases that we hadn't added beforehand. Now, let's recap the idea of attacks and releases because those are always important. Remember, in the world of phrasing and expression, the idea of phrasing allows you to say, here is how I'm going to start a sentence or a musical thought, and releasing is how I'm going to end the musical thought. So I'm going to start with an attack and I'm going to end the thought with a release. And so that's how we kind of create the phrasing. Just like with sentences, we start with an idea and then we end with some sort of punctuation, right? The dog walked through the woods. The woods. Starting, ending. Attacks, start, releases, end. And 2 weeks ago, we introduced 2 different attacks to our already repertoire of attacks. So let's just go over all the attacks that we know so far. There's 4 of them. Very simple, very easy. The first attack is the sigh attack, where you breathe in and you just kind of sigh, right? That takes the flute and you go. There's nothing really pronouncing. There's nothing really kind of starting anything. It's just kind of, and that's a nice little attack. Then we have the whoo attack, which we put a little bit more air in, we put a little gust in, right? So it's whoo, so we get a little bit more pronunciated sound. And I'm over exaggerating here, right? You don't really kind of go in and out with your flute, so it's not like a wah, you're doing that. But the idea is right? You're pushing more air in. Now, I'm overblowing and I'm giving that little bit of higher note. And you don't really have to. You can just kind of give it a little more pronounced. The next attack is the do attack, where you say the word do, and your tongue puts a little bit more emphasis in there. So you go do, 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 do. You hear that little do, 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 and that little duh gives you the emphasis of the note. So here is the do. And it gives you a little more emphasis, a little bit more precision. And then we introduce the to attack, which is the t, 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 which is a lot more precision, a lot more emphasis, and a lot more air that kind of gets pushed through the flute. And with that air, you have the overblow. We talked a little bit about overblow beforehand, and that overblow is just kind of pushing a lot of air through the flute at one time, which produces an overblown effect, which could be an octave higher, could be a much louder gust. It depends upon what the overblow actually is. So here's an overblow effect. So you see how the two can cause that overblow. And those are the 4 attacks. Now, 2 weeks ago in lesson 9, we talked about the do and the to. But more importantly, we did recap all 4 of them. And those 4 attacks are kind of our key attacks that we look at. Are there more? Yes, of course there are. You can have as many attacks as you want to. You just reposition your mouth. You just kind of add more air, or you just kind of start the tone off a little bit differently, right? Can I do a ka attack? Maybe, sure, right? It's just putting ka inside of your flute, like. Now, is that similar to the do and the to? Yes, very much so. But it ends up residing in the back of the throat because of the ka sound instead of the ta, which is up in the front of the mouth. So, can I do a ka, which is a little more precise, using the back of the throat? Yes, and that gives us a guttural type of attack. It's a little bit more guttural. It's kind of come from the stomach more and from the throat more than it does from the tip of the mouth. And yes, you can add more attacks because it's just how you're creating more sounds and how you produce that sound through the flute. That's the important thing. Along with attacks is releases. Remember, attacks start, so releases end. And that's important because the releases will end how the phrase works, right? And so the first release is a very simple release. It's what we call the trail off or the fall off. It's just you kind of running out of air. And just letting it go, right? Just, and it sounds like just a fall off. It just sounds like the sound's there, and then it just kind of goes off into nothing, and the production of the sound is gone. After that fall off, we actually have the cut off, which is just you cutting off the air. So you're blowing, and you're just cutting off the air. Right? So that's it. So you're nothing too like loud, nothing too pronounced. It's just you cutting off air. Now, the cool thing about this is it really does get your like diaphragm engaged as you're doing it. So if you're doing a lot of cut-offs, your stomach's going to go in and out, and your diaphragm's going to kind of push up and down. You're going to feel your muscles in your belly area really start to work. It's just the way that nature of your body and the science works is that your belly is going to be more engaged as the cutoffs happen. Along with that, we have the tonguing release, which is just you putting your tongue into the actual sound hole. So you and your tongue goes and it covers up the hole. And that's you pushing your tongue into the hole, and you get this kind of really abrupt sound cut off. And it could potentially do a little bit of an overblown effect because you're cutting off the sound really quick, which means your last bit of air is actually going in pretty fast, and so you do get a little bit of an overblown effect if you can. Or it could just be very easily your tongue kind of just shuts off the sound. that takes a lot of practice, because now all of a sudden you're using your tongue, and your tongue is not necessarily a muscle that goes in and out as relevantly. You don't do it a lot during the day. You're not like a lizard, so you're type thing, but you do have to practice it, and it does make the muscles in your tongue work a little bit harder to actually get the sound to stop, and the production to work through. And then the final one that we talked about is this idea of, like, it's your tongue going up to the tip of your teeth, which causes like a thwip attack. If you were to say the word thwip, right? Thwip, thwip, thwip. That's what you're doing with your tongue, is that, and your tongue hits the top of your teeth, and that's how the sound stops. So you're doing that, and that your tongue just hits the top of your teeth, and it gives it kind of a little neat effect. It's kind of a little extra gust, but it's also like a really harsh sound stop. And that's the releases, right? So we have 4 releases. And using those releases and using those techniques allow you to create new phrases, allow you to create different ways to start and end your groupings of attacks. Right, we talked about our exercises many weeks ago, and we still have you kind of working on your exercises, creating new exercises for you to kind of build up your skill set. And when you do that, now you can add these phrasings in it, these attacks and releases into your exercises, to create cool phrases and cool melodic lines that you can play over again. Right, so here's an ascending pattern, and I'm just going to group the three notes together into a phrase. And you can hear how the different kind of attacks and releases allow you to have a different phrasing, have a different way of actually keeping those notes together, right? So if I do longs, right, sigh, trail off, kind of good phrase, nice sound phrase. Now we'll make it a little bit more harsher by adding like a do and a thwip attack. So you can hear how the pronunciation is a little bit different, and it just sounds a little bit different. So you can use that however you want to use it in your own personal expression. And that's kind of cool, is to have these kind of sighs and do's and harsher attacks and softer attacks and harsher releases and softer releases. These ideas allow us to create more vocabulary in our expression dictionaries, I guess, is a good way of thinking about it. And that's where we left off on our lesson 9, is understanding those. Now, last week, we introduced an entirely new concept to us, because we were so used to the idea of having an anchor finger here that just kind of sits there and doesn't ever move. And now we introduce this idea of a new anchor finger here. So this one now just sits there and it doesn't move. And this creates a brand new pentatonic. It also allows us to do 2 new things. One, it allows us to have a new note, and it also allows us to understand the idea of alternate fingerings, which is 2 kind of cool concepts, right? So the first thing, right? Anchor finger, we know an anchor finger to be something of, it just sits there, it doesn't move, it doesn't ever change. We just kind of let it sit there and it's always there. And in our original anchor finger, we have it be our 4th finger or our 1st finger on our upper hand, if you want to count it that way. I call it the 4th finger, and that's a good way of thinking about it. So that's our anchor finger. But now we're introducing a new pentatonic scale and talking about this new anchor finger, which is right here. So instead of that being our 4th finger, we're now, our new anchor finger is going to be our 3rd finger. This anchor finger here, right here, is now going to do the same thing as our 4th finger did. It doesn't change, it doesn't move, it just sits there. And that is our new anchor finger on the 3rd. And what that does is it introduces a new note to us. Our original notes, the original notes of our pentatonic scale are, right, name of the flute, whatever that is. That's all the fingers cover. So our first position, name of the flute. Then we skip over the next So then we get to the next letter. So we name of the flute, skip over the letter, get to the next letter. So here's my B flute, skip over C. We're now get to D. Then we go E. Then we're going to go to some sort of F sharp or some sort of F, which here's an F sharp. Then we're going to skip over whatever that F sharp, the next note is. So a G, we're going to skip over it and go to A, and then we're going to go right back to B. And those are our notes on the original pentatonic scale, right? Name, skip, letter, 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 skip, letter, we get back to the same name, like so name of the flute. So B, D, E, F sharp, A, B. That's the names of the flute. In our new pentatonic scale, all we're doing is we're changing one note slightly different. The other ones are alternate fingerings, and we'll talk about that here 1 second. So the names of the flute here. Name of the flute, all fingers covered. That doesn't change, right? The next one, we skip over the next letter and we get to whatever the letter is after that. So here's B, we skip over C, we get to D. Nothing changed. No new, same notes, right? Then we get to this one. So we go from D, we get to E. Again, same thing. B, D, E. Nothing changed. However, in our new pentatonic, we skip over the next letter, whatever the next letter is. So we're skipping our F, and now we're going to get to G, and that's what this letter here is. This is a G on my B flute, and on your other flutes, it's going to be the same type of pattern. Name of the flute, skip, letter, letter, skip, letter, and that's where we are here. So this is our G, and then because of the way of alternate fingerings, we get to an A, and then we get back to a B. Now remember, alternate fingerings is just a different way of using your fingerings to get the same note. So we have this note here, which is a right. So this is a going to a B. That's where these notes are. So we have A going to the A to B. Now the A, if I use my alternate fingering, I'm now going to use this as my A, and then this is my B, right? So A, A, B. Now back to the original fingerings. A, B. And you can see how, even though I'm using a different fingering, I get the same note. And that's the idea of alternate fingerings, is you get the same pitch with different fingerings so that you can make things easier for you. And that's what happens in our new pentatonic scale. So again, to recap the new pentatonic scale, we now have an anchor finger on our third finger, and the name of the notes go like this. We have name of the flute, so B, skip, get to the letter, D, E, hold it, skip. So we're going to skip the F, get to G, A, B, and that's the name of the new pentatonic scale. So we're really introducing that one new tone as well as the new alternate fingerings, and that's how we get the scales, those new pentatonic, or the notes of the new pentatonic scale. And you can hear it's a little bit different than what the original pentatonic scale. The original pentatonic scale sounds like this. New pentatonic scale. So you can hear there's a difference between the new pentatonic scale and the old pentatonic scale. And that's what's kind of important here, is to listen to that difference and understand that difference between the two, and that there's new notes and everything else that's going on. Now, you'll hear as I play that I'm doing something that's very interesting in terms of what the music is. I am doing what's called, like, you'll hear my fingers move really fast back and forth, and just up and down, right? So I'll do this type of playing. Now that little wiggle or that little doo-doo, that's called a trill. And then in the music world, that's just a trill. It's you playing with a neighbor tone, you playing with the notes right next to it to create that kind of pattern of da 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 da. It gives a little bit more interesting ideas. It gives a little more uniqueness to whatever the notes are. But the idea of a trill is just you using what's called a neighbor tone to add emphasis. Now, neighbor tones are really simple. Neighbor tones are just notes that are right next to each other. So, generally speaking, on the keyboard, your neighbor tones are going to be like either your black keys to your white keys or your two white keys right close to each other. Those are the ideas of neighbor tones. They are notes that are, in this essence, next to each other. Now, on scales, depending upon how you play scales, your neighbor tones may be really close to each other or maybe like one note in between each other. And it's that type of neighboring pitch that allows you to have um, easy way for you to add emphasis to some note. For example, I'm just going to show you using first position, so all my fingers, first position and second position. These would be considered neighbor tones on the flute. Now, even though it's a note skipping a note to name to get to the whatever this next tone is, so the B skipping over C to get to D, so it's a B to D. Even though there's distance there between the two letters, it's still considered a neighbor tone because the notes on the flute are right next to each other. It's a neighboring next note. So here's the first position, and here's second position. And you can hear that when you play the neighboring tone, you can emphasize one of the other notes, right? It's just you moving your fingers really quickly back and forth, creating that trill. That's the trill, is your finger moving back and forth. And then whichever note you land on is kind of the note that you're emphasizing. Do I want to emphasize the, first position, or do I want to emphasize second position? Is really how I just end my note. So here it goes. And all of a sudden that emphasizes the first position because I'm ending on the closed. Now, here's me emphasizing on the open. And all of a sudden now the emphasis allows me to have that open pitch sound a little bit more important than the closed pitch, or the first position to the second position, however you want to look at it. Neighboring tones allow us the idea of emphasizing something, which is really kind of cool because all it is that it's a finger wiggle, right? That's all really doing. We're wiggling our finger back and forth, wiggle, 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 and we get a new little kind of emphasis. We get a little bit of a focal point to allow the audience to draw their attention to either one of those two notes. So I can use this kind of trill technique to give you guidance to where I want to have my expression. Now you may say, but wait, Enoch, isn't that just you like moving your finger really fast back and forth? Well, yes, that's all it is. It's a trill. That's really all it is you're moving your finger up and down really quickly. But it's where that kind of up and down movement leads to, where the next note is that you're going to use that allows you to drive emphasis. And that's the key thing about like neighboring tones and this idea of the trill is, where do you want to draw emphasis? If I'm going to go a descending pattern down, right? So I'm going to play all my notes, but I'm going to do a descending pattern down. And let's just say I add a trill in there. I'm going to want to emphasize me going down the scale, not going up the scale. So I can make the trill kind of sound like this. And you can hear now that, oh wow, there is a descending, there's definitely a descending idea here. I want you to hear those notes going down. And it's a little bit more interesting than just playing this. Right? That's just playing notes down, but when I add the trill, makes it a little more interesting. And that's the thing about this kind of idea of neighboring tones and trilling, is to make a little bit things a little bit more interesting. Can I do the same thing going up? Sure. If I want to emphasize going up, I just kind of leave my fingers off on the trill, right? I leave it open instead of leaving it closed. And that's going to allow me to open up and have it feel like it's going to ascend or go upwards in a direction. And all of a sudden you can hear how the ascending works a little bit differently. It's a little bit more interesting again, and we're focusing our direction. Now we can play around with like different types of ideas by saying, okay, do I want to trill and end on the closed, or trill and end on the open, and have my phrasing work. So here is every other note, right? So it's a pattern that I really like. It's the kind of, it's the sixth position, right, to fourth, to fifth, to third, to fourth to second, to third to first, first to second to closed, or in first, or whatever it is. But it's that kind of alternating pattern, right? So you have this. That's the idea. But now I'm going to add some trills in there, and it's going to make it sound just a little bit more interesting. So here. Things just get a little more interesting by just adding these neighbor tones, these trills into the mix. And that's kind of the cool thing about the flute, is being able to put your your attacks, your releases, your ability of understanding where the notes are, with some of these other little techniques to help people kind of feel where the expression is. Do you always want to use trills? No, not all the time, but they do add a little bit of something to your flute playing, and they do add a little bit of color to your expression, and so that's an important thing to do. Can too many trills cause too much? Yes, there's this idea of like overkill, so maybe you don't want to trill all the time, but you do maybe want to trill once in a while to kind of give emphasis to a note. There is something really nice about the purity of sound, just the one note. But there's also something really nice about the idea of adding these neighbor tones, these trills, to get you to the next note as well. You know, using sparingly, using a lot, that's kind of your preference and what you want to do and how you want to make the expression work. You have the control to be able to show people what you want to say, and it's how you want to convey it and how you want to say it. It's just a different type of technique, a different type of idea to get you to that point where you can play something. So let's just kind of recap again. This idea of neighbor tones is the concept of you just having these notes that are right next to each other, right? So the first position is a neighbor tone to the second position. Second is a neighbor tone to the first and the third. However, the second position is not a neighbor tone to the fourth. That would be a jump, or that would be a skip. And so the neighbor tones themselves are where the notes are right next to each other inside the world of the flute playing, or inside the world of music. The trill is using those neighbor tones quickly together to be able to create a kind of a wiggle pattern that allows you to emphasize either ascending or descending, depending on how you leave the last note, right? So if I want to just put a trill in on my, let's just say I have fourth position and I'm going to put trill in, I can emphasize third position by leaving my finger down in the last part, or emphasize my fourth position by leaving my finger up. That's emphasizing it down, so that's emphasizing the third. And that's emphasizing the fourth position because it just leaves it open. And the trill allows us to use those neighbor tones really fast with each other and gets us to the next pitch or the next note up or the next note down. Now, this is a really interesting and a really important kind of skill to lead into because it's going to allow us to do it's going to allow us to do like an octave chirp. It's not quite the chirp. We'll get into chirps a little bit later on, but it allows us to add a little bit more color into it by showing that we can use our fingers more effectively to create a sound, right? And there's a bunch of other techniques that are very similar to the neighbor tone technique that we can start utilizing, but we'll get into that a little bit later with our lessons. The important thing here is with neighbor tones, we are talking about using the notes that are right next to each other to emphasize either ascension or descension of the patterns that we want to emphasize. It's expression. It's about you performing, about you playing, about you learning these kind of cool techniques to go out there and express yourself a little bit better, a little bit differently. And that's really what we're talking about. It's just this idea of cool expression for you. So we're going to leave it with that. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. We are going to be talking more about the flute next time. We'll be recapping, of course, again, because we want you to start playing, we want you to be expressing, and we want you to have as much fun with this instrument as I've had with this instrument, because it is a fantastic instrument. I love it. I think it's great, and I want everyone to enjoy it as well. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I will see you next time.